DAO and governance attacks are responsible for some of the biggest exploits we've seen to date. And so, of course, we want to understand exactly what they are, how they can come about, and how we can actually find exploits in DAO and governance smart contracts ourselves so we can prevent this from happening in the future. So, of course, today we're going to learn everything there is to know about what are DAOs and governance proposals, and what does this logic usually look like? What are some of the common pitfalls that can result in exploits and things of this nature? And of course, how can we spot them ourselves? So before we dive into that, of course, my name is Owen, and over a year and a half ago, I founded Guardian Audits. And ever since then, we've uncovered dozens and dozens and dozens of critical vulnerabilities and smart contracts. And personally, over all of those critical vulnerabilities uncovered, I've spent easily over 2,000 hours at this point auditing smart contracts. And so my goal with all of these videos and everything that I put out, and especially this one, is to give you everything you need, everything that I've gone through in those 2,000 hours, all of my experience, and distill it down and give it to you so that you can become a much, much better security researcher, blockchain engineer, whatever you're looking to be in a fraction of the time. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into DAO and governance attacks. All right, fantastic. So today we've got the whiteboard pulled up here. We're going to dive into, first of all, what are DAOs? What is a DAO? What does smart contract logic look like for a DAO? What does all that voting logic look like? And then we're going to dive into, okay, how does one exploit a DAO? What do DAO attacks even look like? Why are these such a bad thing? And of course, what are the common reasons that lead to a DAO being exploitable? What does that look like? And we're going to look at a real exploit of a DAO and of voting mechanisms that actually occurred, and it was one of the largest exploits to date. So we're going to understand exactly how that happened, and we're going to come to understand exactly what exploit DAO and governance exploits are, and we have a deep understanding of how they come about. So first of all, of course, let's just start off with the simplest, right? What is a DAO, right? So a DAO is, of course, a decentralized autonomous organization. It's, kind of really an amorphous term. What is an organization? But it is exactly that. It is a collection of smart contracts or logic that just determine exactly how a organization, a set of entities, interact to make decisions, right? At a fundamental level, anything that an organization does, a company, a family, or anything like this, they make decisions, right? So what we have with a DAO is we have basically a bunch of smart contracts that will basically just facilitate the making of decisions. So what you might have is, often what we'll have is a big pool of money or something that is governed by the DAO, and then there will be a smart contract that will essentially track voting for specific proposals. So what will happen is somebody will be able to create a proposal, and this will be something to basically do something with this big lump of money that is controlled by the DAO, right? Now, once somebody has created the proposal with the governance smart contract, then addresses, any arbitrary user, you can have, some random address, OA, FF, ... Any arbitrary person can come and vote on that proposal, right? We can vote, usually there will be something like a vote function, and then any address can come and vote for a proposal. You can vote yay, you can vote nay, and then as enough addresses vote, then the proposal will either have enough to actually pass and be executed, in which case that the smart contract will, in some cases, actually go and literally move funds on chain into, whatever, if the proposal was to donate to a particular organization or anything like that, the smart contract that holds the governance mechanism is actually going to be able to move those funds in that transaction where the proposal gets executed. So if it passes, then this logic can go through and it can actually literally occur on chain. Or if it doesn't pass, then this, of course, doesn't happen and the proposal just gets, removed or inactive or, something like this. It depends on the logic of the governance contract. But this is a DAO at a high level. I think a good example of a DAO is, of course, Nouns DAO. This is probably one of the most popular DAOs. And essentially the way that this DAO works is you can see we've got a bunch of nouns here. There's one noun a day, which is basically an NFT that just gets auctioned off, right? So we can see currently somebody is bidding 20 ETH, which is, something like $30,000 plus for one of these NFTs. And then the proceeds from these auctions will go to the treasury, right? That's the big ball of money that the DAO controls. So here's the treasury. And then we can actually see in the case of Nouns DAO, we can see the treasury right here actually. And the treasury is currently holding almost $9 million. So they've got almost $9 million right now in this big ball. And so in the case of Nouns DAO, the way that you're able to vote is if you own an NFT, right? So people can create proposals and holders of an NFT can actually come and vote on them. And then they can command that $9 million and do things that the majority of people who are able to vote want to do. So the entire focus of governance attacks is then how do we basically manipulate this action right here. This is essentially the entire focus, right? So the actual execution of a proposal, right? And the vast majority of times what this will look like is we are going to propose a malicious proposal and we're going to get that proposal to go through, right? So I mean, it's kind of the obvious attack vector here because we have a system that is essentially allowing you to move any amount of funds, potentially the entire treasury, in a single transaction, right? So if I can submit a transaction, I can submit a proposal that says, yeah, we're going to send the entire treasury to me. Obviously, if that goes through an actual governance process and there's no tampering or hacking or anything like this, then everybody else is not going to vote for that, right? Because that doesn't benefit them, right? In fact, that would be very bad for the DAO. And so if the voting power is sufficiently decentralized, then, maybe I have 10% of the voting power. I would vote for that. I want me to get everything, right? But the 90%, the other people who control the 90% of voting power, they don't want that because they get nothing, right? So we're looking for ways specifically in the business logic of this contract here, which is the governance contract. So I'll just put gov here. We're looking for business logic flaws in the governance contract that allows us to get a malicious proposal to actually pass and be executed, even though it's something that gives me all the money, right? So what are some common ways that we can actually get something like this to happen? So we're going to see what this actually looks like in practice with a real exploit and a real governance contract here in just a second. But I think it would be important to go over a few of the common ways that this can actually come up in practice, right? So a really common error in the business logic is if you vote for a proposal, you need to make sure that the voting power, whatever, if it's tokens, if it's NFTs, whatever it is locked up in that proposal, right? And it's locked up for that address, right? So I should not be able to vote for a proposal and then transfer my tokens, whatever, my NFT or anything that's holding the voting power. I shouldn't be able to transfer it to a new address and have that new address vote, and then you can transfer it to a new one and vote and just basically make one token have infinite voting power, right? So when a user votes, they should not be able to transfer their voting power to a new address and vote again using the same voting power, right? So, I mean, that's somewhat of an obvious one, but you'd be surprised how many times that sort of attack vector can come up in a given governance contracts implementation or something like this. This is a particular kind of vulnerability that you'll want to be looking for and you'll want to be thinking about when you are having a look at a governance contract. The next thing that we want to really be sure of is that we're not able to flash loan tokens in order to get a proposal to go through. And really what we need to look into and really break that down into is, okay, if you can flash loan the governance token somehow and get governance power in a single transaction and have that governance power be able to apply to a current proposal, that's one thing, right? So the first aspect of this is, let's break it down like, yeah, we'll say one. So the first thing is, if you are able to flash loan the governance token, whatever that may be, and get voting power in a single transaction over a live proposal. So that's step one here. If that is possible, then we also need to be able to get this voting power back to be able to pay back the flash loan in the same transaction, right? So you can take the flash loan out, you can take $100 million out, but you need to be able to pay that back, because I don't know about you, I don't have $100 million just sitting around on chain. So 2, you are able, let's break it up like this. So 2, you are able to get the governance token back to pay back the flash loan in the same transaction. And usually what this will look like is, it basically, if you're ever able to vote for something and get it over the threshold and execute the proposal, if you're ever able to do those two things in the same block, that is usually going to lead to this kind of vulnerability, right? So there needs to be at least a 1 block difference between where you're able to flash loan stuff and to be able to vote, and when you're able to commit and execute the actual proposal and remove those flash loaned funds, right? So as long as those are separated in 2 different blocks, they could be right next to each other, but as long as they're, or 2 different transactions even, they could even be in the same block, but as long as they have to go in 2 different transactions, then at that point it becomes impossible to flash loan, because you can't pay back the flash loan without going under the voting threshold, or maybe you don't even have the voting token until the proposal is over or something like that. It depends on the logic, right? But that's what we're looking for, right? We're able to get the governance token back in the same transaction. Usually you'll have to execute the proposal in the same transaction. So if I'm able to vote and execute in the same transaction, red flag. Okay, and then I think additionally, this is a little bit of a different type of exploit, just because it's not particular to the implementation of the governance contract. You could have a perfectly well-meaning, well implemented governance contract, but if there is a malicious contract associated with the proposal, or if there's just bugs in it, then if that proposal goes through, even though, it might be a well-meaning proposal, it might not actually be malicious, it might just be buggy, or it might have some backdoors in it, then that as well can lead to some vulnerabilities, right? So on top of having a really well-audited, well-reviewed governance contract, then you also need to be sure to be able to get reviewers on any contracts that are associated with new proposals, right? Because there might not even be a bug in the governance contract. There might be a bug in the contract associated with the proposal, or the contract could be malicious. And then I think I'll also add to this, any contract associated with the proposal should not have the self-destruct opcode, right? And so we've actually seen this with the Tornado Cash governance exploit. Now, if a contract has the self-destruct opcode somewhere hidden within it, and an attacker is able to use that as kind of like a backdoor, to be able to call it, then you can actually change the logic that's in that smart contract. And so if you want to know more about that, and you want to know more about EIP 6780, which is going to sort of, change the behavior of self-destruct and make that not possible, then go and check out my metamorphic contracts video with the full breakdown of the Tornado Cash governance exploit. You can check that out. It's on my channel. Just go ahead and search for it. And, that will go over everything related to that. So these are just a few things that you want to be looking out for. These are the attack vectors that you want to keep your eyes peeled for when you're looking at a governance system, anything like this. But now let's actually have a look at what this looks like in a real, actual exploit. And in fact, an exploit that ended up in over, I think, $180 million being stolen from a governance system, right? So here we've got pulled up, I've got the governance facet pulled up here on for Beanstalk. So this is the Beanstalk governance facet, and about almost 2 years ago at this point, there was an exploit of this exact governance facet contract here that resulted in an attacker walking away with over $180 million of profit at the end of the day. So let's understand exactly, first of all, how does this system work? And then we'll have a look at what was the attacker able to do to exploit the system and walk away with a staggering 180 mil. So first of all, of course, you can create a proposal with this propose function. Now, something that will be, slightly important later is that this whole, Beanstalk system uses the diamond proxy standard. So if you want to know more about the diamond standard, we're not going to cover it in depth in this video, but if you want to know more, then check out my 5 upgradability patterns video also on the channel. Now, what's going to happen is when you propose, they're going to create the actual improvement proposal here, and that's going to be stored in storage. And then there will be, some relevant like time window things. And then of course, whoever proposes it, the message.sender of this proposed transaction, will be counted as a voter for this proposal, right? So you propose it, you vote for it yourself, right? Now, there is also, of course, a vote function for those other users, right? These other people who want to vote. They say, okay, I think you have a good proposal. I'm going to vote yes on this proposal, or I don't like the proposal. I'm going to vote no. This is for these folks to do their voting, right? And so when we go to underscore vote, which is in the voting booth, we're going to record vote and place voted until. So record vote. Importantly, what happens here is basically it just says, okay, for your account, for this BIP, which is a Beanstalk improvement proposal, you have voted. And so that is preventing an issue of, can I vote multiple times? So that's another sort of obvious baseline thing, is that when somebody votes, they should not be able to vote again, right? And then of course we're going to basically track, okay, for this BIP, how much roots, how much voting power is being, weighted towards, yes, I actually have voted here. And then if we're able to get over a certain threshold, then the vote can actually pass. Okay, so we have the voting functionality here. You can propose, people can vote. Now, how do we execute, right? So we can scroll down here until we find the commit function. So commit has, basically some checks, obviously, to make sure that it's an actual valid BIP, it's an active BIP, et cetera, and also importantly that the vote percent for the BIP is actually greater than or equal to the governance pass threshold. And we can see if we go into the C contract here, the governance pass threshold is exactly 50%, right? So 1E18 would be 100%. This is 5E17, 50%. So 50% of the total voting power must go towards this proposal, and if it doesn't, then it didn't pass. And then finally we execute, right? So in execute, we'll basically, update the storage to make sure that the BIP has ended. We'll mark that it's actually been executed now, and then we're going to cut. So this is related to the diamond standard, so we'll get into this in just a second. This is where any additional logic for the proposal can actually get executed, and then we're going to basically update the state of the BIP if it's paused or unpaused, and then we're going to reward the person who actually called the execution, because we want these executions to happen, right? So we just incentivize somebody to actually call this function. So interestingly, we want to get into cut BIP. So that's going to happen in the bip.sol file. We're going to see, so if diamond cut is empty, then we don't do anything. If it's not, and we actually have a diamond cut and an init address and some data to go along with it, then we're going to call this libdiamond.diamondCut function. So we're not going to cover everything to do with the diamond standard here, but we are going to go over a bit of what happens in this diamond cut function. So if I make it a little bit bigger here, and then we'll see, I can shrink that a little bit. We can see that when we call this diamond cut function, we're providing, first of all, just a list of facets here. So if we want to add new contracts for specific function selectors, or we can see like replace and remove and these different types of actions, that's what's happening in this function. But more importantly, what's happening here is at the end. Even if we don't have any diamond cuts associated with this, we're going to initialize diamond cut, and that is going to be, so we're basically making an arbitrary call on an arbitrary address. So we've got arbitrary address that we're calling, and with arbitrary call data. So let's see exactly what happens here. So we'll go to this function here. It looks like the solidity code is like a little bit mangled here, but that's fine. So what will happen here in this initialize diamond cut function is, importantly, so we'll have an actual init address that isn't 0. So we're going to go in here, and ultimately we're going to delegate call to the init address, right? Remember, this is an arbitrary address. This is arbitrary code right now that we are delegate calling, and we're providing arbitrary call data, right? So we're letting anybody do anything with our contract, right? So we're letting anybody do anything on the system, essentially, because we're delegate calling from a diamond, right? So the diamond in the diamond standard is the entire protocol. Basically, it has all the storage that matters and everything. So we're allowing anybody to do anything with all of the app storage, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the gravity of what we're doing when we are actually allowing a proposal to be executed, right? So when we call this commit function right here, when we call this commit function, we are essentially, whatever the proposal was, we're allowing it to do whatever it is supposed to do with whatever address it provided for that init address. And a proposal has the power to do literally anything, right? So that's why it's extremely important that these proposals are, first of all, vetted and voted on accordingly, and the code in these contracts is well understood. But then, of course, that they actually can be vetted and voted on, right? So we never want to allow a proposal to just be proposed and executed, right? Because anybody can just steal all the funds in the protocol very easily, right? So that brings us to, how did somebody exploit this system, right? So with this commit function here, we are fundamentally safe because of this not is active requirement, right? So if we go to the definition of is active here, we are requiring that essentially the season, so basically the current time is before the actual, it's within the end time of the proposal, right? So if it is active, then voting is still open. If it isn't active, then voting is closed, right? So essentially, we're requiring that voting is closed when we're committing, right? You can only, when we look at the vote function up here, so the fact that we require is active to vote and we require not is active to commit means that the vote and the commit cannot happen in the same transaction. And so this fundamentally protects us from this situation that we laid out here with these two steps, because we can't have a vote and a commit or an execute in the same transaction, right? So there's no way to flash loan a bunch of the governance token, get a ton of voting power and vote, and then execute it and get that voting power back and pay back the flash loan, right? It can't happen in the same transaction, so the flash loan won't work. Now, however, there is this emergency commit function, and we'll notice a distinct difference with the emergency commit function that allowed an attacker to basically steal $180 million. So on line 185 here, we can see that they actually require that is active, right? So this emergency commit is a way for, God forbid they needed some emergency governance proposals to go through. So they are allowing, instead of the normal governance proposal period, they are allowing after a emergency period, which we can see is set to 1 day here. After 1 day, you can get an emergency commit through, right? So obviously the proposal is technically, it's still active even 1 day in, right? So of course, when it's active, you can vote and you can do this emergency commit in the same exact transaction. So that opens up exactly this exploit here that we've laid out. And you can flash loan from anywhere, and in particular for the Beanstalk protocol, you can flash loan tokens and you can provide liquidity on curve. And then what you can do is you can use those LP tokens to be able to deposit into the silo, which is something that's a part of the Beanstalk system, and then get actual governance tokens. And now you have voting power. Now you can vote for your own malicious proposal and you can get it over this defined emergency threshold. So they do require not just 50%, a little bit higher than 50%. We can see they actually require 2/3, right? So 2 divided by 3, they require 66.7% to actually be able to pass an emergency proposal. But of course, you can do that. You can do that if you're able to flash loan hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So it's not too hard to achieve. And so what was the attacker able to do? Well, they were able to basically propose a malicious proposal where the init address that's going to be delegate called to when we cut, and we end up calling this initialize diamond cut function, this underscore init address was for a malicious contract that basically just had logic that said, okay, there's a ton of funds in this Beanstalk contract, in this diamond contract, which is going to be basically the contract that is executing the code as we delegate call to the init contract. It's going to say basically, okay, all of this Ether that we have, all this USDC that we have, send it all to the attacker, right? So that is exactly what happened. The attacker made a proposal for a contract that just said, okay, we're going to send all the money to the attacker, and they're able to wait 1 day for this requirement here to pass so that they could actually call this emergency commit function. And then in one transaction, borrowed a bunch of funds from, Aave and different flash loan providers, voted for themselves, got themselves over the supermajority of 67%, and then called this emergency commit function, and they were able to execute it and ultimately claim $180 million plus. So that is exactly what happened in the Beanstalk governance exploit, and that is really the gist of everything that you need to know about governance and DAO exploits. And so really you want to be looking for these specific types of exploits in the business logic of these governance contracts. And of course, you also want to be checking that in any contract that goes through a governance proposal, that contract as well should be thoroughly vetted and very well understood before it actually goes through the proposal. All right, fantastic. I hope that this video gave you, a good idea of what exactly DAO and governance proposals are and how you can actually go and find these yourself in real live smart contract systems. And hopefully the next time you have a look at a DAO and governance contract, you'll be checking for some of these key things here. All right, and of course, if you're really interested in smart contract security, you're interested in connecting with tons of folks from across the world and, getting to understand how they think about smart contract security and understanding what they're doing to really learn this stuff, then of course you can join our absolutely free community at lab.guardianaudits.com. You can fill out the form and join the community. And that is all for this time. I can't wait to see you in the next one.